squared this whole thing up, and you could see in the back where I have my rabbet here, and then I cut these panels and set the stretchers so they line up with that rabbet, so I could cut a sheet the height of this and the width of this, and it will fit right in my back. And I want to do that before I glue all these together, because the back not only prevents racking of the cabinet, but it'll help square up. And since I'm moving this stuff around a lot, you don't necessarily have to put the back on while you're gluing it up, but it just helps me in my shop to get everything lined up. So the width is going to be the same width you cut for your panels and your stretchers, which is 30 1/8, and the height of these is 32 1/4. So I'm going to cut 4 of those backs before I start gluing all of this stuff together. Glue up on these is usually pretty straightforward. On this one it's a little bit different. Usually I put screw holes in all my dados, and then I just screw them from the outside in. Not necessarily for strength, but if everything's drying, the screws act as clamps and hold everything together. But since you'll be able to see one side of these cabinets on each side of the built-in, I can't put screws on one of the cabinets right hand side, because you want that panel clean because you're going to see it. I could put screws on one side, but 2 of them I'm going to have to keep one right side clear and one left side clear, because it will be on the other side, and I'll have to use clamps to glue that one together. My piece is ready to go now that the backs are cut and they're over there. I took a scrap piece of that 3/4 inch plywood and leveled it on the top of my table saw and covered it, because there's going to be glue going on it not to ruin it. You can see how unlevel my shop is, and that's just because you want to be working the easiest. You can glue these up on unlevel surfaces, but it just makes life so much harder. It's just so much easier to glue stuff up if you're working with a level surface. So I have all my parts, and I'm going to put together the 2 that it doesn't really matter where the screws go first. And that means that before I start gluing things together from the inside of the dado, I drill a couple holes, pre-drill a couple holes, so that when I go to the other side, I know exactly where to sink my screws. That is my cabinet carcass all glued together, and in the video you'll notice that I measured the diagonal at the end to make sure the whole thing's square. If it's not square, not only will it look terrible when you go to install it, but it's going to make putting your face frames on there a lot harder as well. Now usually with the way I put on the backs with the rabbets, if your back doesn't fit, there's gaps in your back, that's usually a telltale sign your cabinet's not square. And if it's not square, which is not uncommon since it's only a couple pieces holding it together, you can use the back to square up the cabinet, which is why I like to put these together all at once. The other thing is, even if you're not using these splines, if you're going to be building your face frame with pocket hole screws, make sure that these are flush if there's any undulation in the plane of the front of this. So if these aren't flush, then your face frame's not going to lay flat on here. So even with that glue and a couple screws, tugging on this and shaking it, they are super sturdy. And with the construction of having it without a top, they're actually very lightweight, and this is just about the size of a regular cabinet. Like I said, it's a little bit shorter because mine don't have a toe kick. So I'm going to take this, I'm going to put it to the side, and I'm going to glue up the other 3. 2 of them I'm going to have to use clamps, but the process is going to be the same for the entire thing. These are my cases all dry and set up in the order I want them, and I also made my base for it and put them on top of that. If you're making more traditional style cabinets, you won't need that base. Instead, you will have a toe kick. Start cutting my face frames for these cabinets, and since this is 11/32 ply, all of these verticals I'm going to be cutting at 3/4, and that will mean that these ends will meet on the face frame, not the plywood. And you want that because this plywood might not be perfectly flat or straight going up and down. So if you only have to worry about that front edge meeting perfectly, it makes life a heck of a lot easier. On the edge that meets the wall, I'm going to be cutting 1-inch face frames so that when I get to the house, I can scribe that edge to the wall and make a perfect match. So you'll want a little extra to be able to scribe it. And the reason I'm making these so my face frames are going to be flush vertically with the edges of my plywood, and that's so that even though these cabinets will have face frames, I could still buy frameless style European concealed hinges, which I just find to be the easiest to find and the easiest to install for this type of cabinetry. So for face frames, I buy poplar from the big box stores in large sheets and cut it down into smaller pieces. By doing that, it's fairly cheap, it's already planed. I've never really planed or jointed from the box store, and I haven't had a problem. It just saves a lot of time. So I already have it marked out. I'm going to be cutting these to the height of my cabinets, and then I have 3/4 inches set up on my table saw, so I could just cut chunks off of this. And I'll also be using this poplar to make the doors and then rip it down. And I have a bunch of these splines already cut, which is what I'm using to attach these face frames. I might have to cut a couple more of those, and this is just 3/32 in masonite. With all these strips cut, I could put it on the cabinet and line it up so it's flush on the inside. You can see how it has that slight overhang so that these two face frames will meet and not the sides of these cabinets. And then I just marked where that groove is, and I could take this to my table saw and raise the blade to about 3/8 of an inch, which is what the groove cut into the plywood is, and cut all these grooves. Now putting these face frames on the sides, attaching to my two sides, and I've already done the other 3 cabinets and they went on pretty well. And these are really light, so it's easiest to bring them into my shop one at a time, lay them on their backs, and attach them that way. So I just take these strips, and you can cut these with snips. This stuff's pretty thin. Cut it to size. I put glue in each groove and then attach it, and then I sink some brads into it just to hold it in place while it dries, and the brad holes are super easy to fill with putty before painting. Follow the exact same process for the top and bottom rails of these face frames. The only difference is this one, from the bottom of my cabinet to the top of the shelf is 1.25 inches, so I'm going to make the top and bottom 1.25 inches, but other than that, it's the exact same process. With my carcasses made, I'm now going to make my doors. I'm going to have 8 doors that are 15 5/8 by 31, and I'm using Blum's full overlay European style hinges to attach these doors. And I have a couple videos on my channel already about making doors, and a couple videos about different style hinges and mounting hinges. So I'm not going to film this as part of the how-to. I'll probably just film it and speed it up and add it to the video just so you could see how I do it. But that's kind of my plan for now, and I'm going to be making these out of poplar. So that is my cabinet with the face frame on there, and now I'm going to go through, before I mount those doors I made, and I'm going to put holes in the side for the adjustable shelves, as well as sand all my face frames and patch any holes I have. The nice thing about cabinets like this is, except for the two on the end where you have to sand the side, on these you don't have to worry about the sides, the bottoms, the tops, or the backs, which makes sanding nice. And I like to split it up that way just because sanding gets really tedious and boring. So if you do them all at once, it just can sometimes be really annoying. So if you're breaking it up with little jobs, you're not continuously sanding. So I already did the one side of holes on this one, and I'm going to show you how I do them on this side. And to start that, I'm going to flip it on its side. I know that there are jigs you can buy for this application, but I just usually take a piece of scrap, since you're really going to just want holes kind of right in the center. No one wants a shelf that's going to be right here or all the way towards the top. So I just put a nice amount of pinholes in the center, and I'm using this spacer on either side to get those right. And then I just use scrap pegboard on top of that, and I'll drill out all these second holes from the back. I'll take my spacer, move it to the front, right in front of my face frame, and then do the same thing. Now I have a 13/64" bit in there, which is what hole size these little brass coated shelf pins take, and I just put a little piece of electrical tape as a depth guide. It's not a huge deal on these if you drill through the one side, because you'll never see them, but on the side that faces out towards the fireplace, you don't want to drill through the side. So you just have kind of that piece of tape there to tell me how far to go. So I have my cabinet set up, and I cut a piece of plywood 19 1/4 by 30 by 64 1/4, and that's going to be my top. And I'm just going to briefly show you how to finish off these cabinets with a wooden style top. A lot of people might be using granite or something else, but if this is going to be a built-in like these are, you could easily finish it off with a wooden style top. So on the edge that hits the wall, I'm not going to do anything. You're never going to see the plies. Same with the back. The front, in order to hide the plies, I'm going to be cutting the front and the side on a 45°, and then cut probably a piece of poplar also at a 45°, and that will cover that edge. It will also, you could put a strip on top of here with glue, but then you'll have a seam. The nice thing about the 45 is it's going to look like it's one solid piece. My blade set to a 45 and a sacrificial fence, and I'm just going to send these pieces through and cut those 45s. The last thing I'm going to do to the inside of these cabinets before I could prime them is put this screwing strip in the back up top, just like that. Now this is just a scrap of 3/4 inch ply. It's actually pretty thick for this application, but I had this scrap, so that's what I'm using. And that's basically just so that when you put these in the space, you don't want to screw through the back of this because it's fairly thin, so you'll screw through the back of this, which will be mounted up here into the studs, and that will hold everything in place. So I'm just going to put some glue on that, and I'm just going to put some brads from the back holding it into place, and then I can start priming these. So I usually don't spend a ton of time showing you how I paint these because painting's fairly straightforward. I'm going to put 2 coats of Kills latex primer on here, and then 2 top coats, and then usually I do touch-ups at the customer's house, which makes it 3 coats. But usually I have one of those sprayers, and that works great, but sometimes those things are more of a hassle than they are a time saver. So I usually do these where I cut in all the corners with a paintbrush and then use a roller, and that goes pretty well, and a roller gives you a nice finish. But I was actually watching a YouTube video and I saw a guy using one of these flat padded brushes. So I picked one up today at the store, and it works awesomely. I think it takes like easily half the amount of time as a roller, and it does just as good of a job. So my kind of technique I've been using for this is I put a big dollop of paint in the middle and then just spread it all over the inside of the cabinet. The next day, and that coat on all these cabinet carcasses has dried, I'm putting on second coat, and then I'm probably going to put these aside while I build the rest of the built-in, and then finish coat all at once, because of course, like every project I do, as soon as it's time to paint, there's about a week of terrible weather coming up. So if you're using this nice birch veneer or maple veneer or whatever nice grade ply your hardware store has, there's not a ton of sanding involved in that. It's already pretty smooth, and the poplar is a little fuzzy, especially since I cut it with a rough saw blade, and it had some patching to do. And I don't really sand these before I paint them. When everything's all said and done, there's usually 5 coats of paint on these built-ins. So I put on that first coat, and the water and the paint naturally makes that grain raise and brings that fuzz to a surface, and then I just lightly sand in between each of my coats with 150 grit sandpaper, and that's about all the sanding I do on these. It's so much faster than initially going through and sanding them super smooth. By the time you get to that 5th coat, these are going to be smooth just by sanding in between each. So that pad I've been using works absolutely fabulously. I done the other 3 of these, and it's just making the time go by so much faster.